This is episode number 507 of the Health and Fitness Podcast, brought to you by InnerFight in association with Smith Street Paleo. Hop over to smithstreetpaleo.com. Check out all the yummy paleo food over there. Welcome back to another edition of the show, and this is the very first episode of our series. The new changes to the podcast, we're going to be running a series through the Sunday shows, and this is episode 1. We're talking in this series about the rise of ultra running, and who else better to get with me on the show than our own endurance coach, Tom Walker. This is a 4-part series. Episode 1 today, what is an ultra? We're going to be focusing on that. Then we're going to hop in next week to episode 2, why is ultra running actually rising, in podcast 509. We're then going to talk to you about how to train for an ultra in episode 3. And then finally, to close out this series, we're going to explain to you how you should get involved and what are the first steps. This is our first series, 4 episodes. It's called The Rise of Ultra. I really hope you guys enjoy it. So here we go. This is number 1 in our series, episode number 1 of series number 1. And what a great way to kick it off. What a great person to have here to kick it off, Tom Walker.
Oh, mate.
The rise of ultra.
Yeah, what a rise it is.
It sounds like almost a when I came up with the title The Rise of Ultra, I was like mountains and out of the valley of death and stuff like that. So, mate, hopefully we can deliver on that. But mate, yeah. I want to ask you, because you're the geek, what is? I mean, we better start by defining what really is going on. What is an ultra?
An ultra is any run race with a distance greater than a marathon.
Right. So
basically
that, yeah. I mean, that's which, mate, what's your thoughts on that? Like, if I do 45k, have I really run an ultra? Like, is there an argument there? What's really going on?
To me, an ultra, I think, is over 50k.
Right.
I know some people out there define it as being 100 miles.
Yeah, I think that, mate, that's where some of them really started as well, wasn't it? Like the Western States 100 is one of the oldest ones that we've been able to find. Started in 1974.
Yeah,
I was not born yet.
Definitely wasn't.
You weren't born yet, but I was only 4 years out. But I mean, mate, so the point is that this thing called ultra has been around for really quite some years already.
Yeah, it has. But it was, I think most of the time back then it was like endurance horse racing or
right.
like sled dog racing.
Sounds so much better.
Yeah, or like old trails that used to be like horse and carts were pulled along, and then it just became like, oh, I bet you can't run it. And then next thing you know, someone's run it, or a journey that someone used to have to do, and it became like an iconic journey that then got a race built around it.
I mean, mate, let's talk about that a little bit. If we go on your definition, anything longer than a marathon, so you say like it has to be at least 50 for it to be normal. But, mate, until recently, like a marathon for a lot of people is something huge. Why do you think it evolved sort of starting in the 70s? And we're going to talk later in the series about what it really is today. But why do you think people just wanted more?
I think it's why people climb mountains. It's why, you know, you get ultra cycling. It's someone breaks a barrier, like the 4-minute mile, and then suddenly in the next year, like 6 people manage to do it. So it's like someone's run a marathon and then gets comfortable running that marathon pace. Now, how comfortable can you get running like the 50k? How comfortable you get running 50 miles? And it's human nature to just constantly want to outdo yourself.
I guess, like you said there, mate, that's how it started. Like, it starts with these races are dog races or dogs on sleds or horse races, and then someone's just turned around and gone, well, why can't we run that? I mean, that's really how, if we look at the sport that you're heavily involved in, that's really how Ironman Triathlon started, wasn't it? Tell us a story about that, mate.
Well, they were they wanted to find out who was the most all-rounded athlete. Yeah. And it was it swimmers, cyclists, or runners? Or I think they were surf
lifesavers.
Surf lifesavers. Yeah. So then they just came up with a race that involved all 3. And look what it's built to today. I mean, can you imagine those 8 guys standing on the beach in Kona?
Yeah.
And now what it is today is...
How did they get the distances, though, for that, mate? Do you know the backstory there?
I don't. It was to do... The swim distance was to do, I think, with one island to another.
Right.
And then the bike distance was, I think, pretty much around the island, because it wasn't always originally from Kona. It was a different island. So it worked out to be 112 miles.
Right.
And then I don't know why it happened to be a marathon.
Obviously,
I guess
it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's always, so where we're getting to sort of, is that there's always been this thirst to go a little bit longer. Obviously, as humans, we a lot of the time we're focused on going faster. It's exciting when Usain Bolt runs faster, but then not everyone's going to go fast. People are just going to go longer.
Exactly.
And I mean, mate, that's really, if we look at it, some of the stats that we've got here for you guys, I'll just read these off because I haven't been able to recite them for you. But the Western States 100 remains, which is a 100-mile race, 160k race, remains one of the most famous races. That has been running since 1974. That's the oldest one we could find. Obviously, if you guys have something a little bit older, please email us, winning@InnerFight.com. We'd love to hear from you. After that, mate, and this is probably one of the driving forces, definitely outside of the US, is Marathon des Sables.
Yeah.
You found out a bit of background on that and what happened in the first race.
Yeah. Well, what I was amazed to know is the first one wasn't a race. It was a guy who you said still is involved with it now.
Yeah, I'm 99% sure that it's the guy, Patrick Bauer, that started the race.
Yeah, and he just set out to cross the Sahara, completely self-supported, had a backpack with all his water and food in, and I think he said he was going to take him 12 days.
Yes.
And then off he went. And then the following year, I think they were 23. They called them the Pioneers.
Yes.
Then went and did it.
And Patrick Bauer is actually French. He's still race director of the race, and he's at every single stage. He's at every single camp. He blabbers on in French. And when actually, I mean, this is a lot of the population that follow ultra. Like in France, it's huge ultra racing. So I think of Marathon des Sables, which to give this some scale is one of the biggest races. It's a multi-stage race, which we'll go into as well. Is that it is 1,000, when I did it in 2014, it was 1,000, or 2015, 1,300 people.
It's amazing.
So from Patrick going, and we're now sort of 34th or 35th edition of the Marathon des Sables, which I think, mate, I don't know, it's hard because it's a race that I've done, but it's almost like the race that you have to do. What's your thoughts on that, sort of coming from the endurance world, on, like, does Marathon des Sables set the standard? Is that what people measure off?
I think if you've done Marathon des Sables, people know you're pretty legit in what you can do.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't get that excited for it.
No.
Myself. Why? I don't know. I think now it's everyone I speak to is like, oh, it's an amazing race, but then they reel off like 5 things that make it not so amazing, and they're like, I've done it, but you've got to travel.
Yeah.
It's really expensive.
Yeah.
You've got to have this in your pack. It's really expensive, all the training, all the gear, the equipment. And I think part of Ultra is stripping everything back to being like raw.
The adventure.
And you can just go pick up your bag and run.
Yeah.
And this doesn't sound like that's what it is.
I think it's a really interesting point, mate. More races that are going around at the moment. There's 2 other big series that I've known of and that we want to highlight here. So if people want to know what Ultra is, don't just look at MDS, don't just look at the Western States. Go and have a look at Racing the Planet website. They do 4 races a year. They actually do and they search for like a Grand Slam winner. So the big challenge there was about 6 or 7 years ago. They've changed a little bit. They're in Namibia now. They used to be in the Sahara. They've got one in the Antarctica, so in cold. They've got one in the Gobi Desert, and they've got what they call the Atacama Crossing. And what they did at the start, which goes into what we were saying before, is they challenge people to finish all 4 races within a calendar year.
Right.
Because of the toll Ultra takes, and these are multi-stage races as well. And that's one thing we should say, which we should have said earlier. There's 2 types of Ultra. Yeah. Sort of jumping around a little bit here. We'll come back to that in a second. But I think it's right what you're saying about MDS a bit there, mate, is that now that there's a lot more choice out there, somehow that race doesn't sound as attractive as it once did. But I still feel that, like you said, if you want to be proven in ultra running, MDS is a badge you want to have. We'll go into the costs and stuff about them later on in the series, guys, and how you can get involved. But what I want to speak about, mate, is I want to hop back to that. Different types. Anything over 42k, you define it as it has to be 50, which I'm quite fine with there, mate.
Yeah.
But we see different types. We see single stage and multi-stage races. Talk to us a little bit about what the difference is and the makeup of these.
Single stage is you have a start point and a finish point. and you get to that end point as quickly as you can. So you might not sleep, you might, but it's completely up to you. Multi-stage is you have one set route, but it's broken up into different stages along that route. So Marathon des Sables, for example, is it 350?
250k over 6 days.
Yes.
So, but one of the days is super long, so it's like about 85, 90k on one day. So, again, if I go back to my experience when I did it, 36k, 38k, 90k was the longest long day because it was the 30th anniversary, and it always finishes with an exact marathon, 42.2k on the final day. So you have the fourth day, and the fifth day to finish. It's very generous cutoff, 36 hours. You don't want to use 36 hours because it's carnage. So you basically, as soon as you get in, you have the whole of the next day to rest, and then you have a 42k, so you have a marathon through the desert on the last day.
Whereas like the boys who did Oman, UTMB Oman in end of last year, was 140k, which you could easily make a stage race, but it was a one-hitter. It was single stage, and you just got done as quickly as you could.
Mate, what's your views on, because there's a lot of argument within the ultra community, which race is harder. You were saying there before, you've heard about MDS, maybe it doesn't compare, and you've heard about other stuff. What's your views? What's harder, multi-stage, single stage? How do you see it?
I think both are equally hard. I think they both take different types of training. If you're doing a single stage, then you need to just have an absolute diesel engine and be a bit smarter with your pacing, fueling strategy. I think on the multi-stage work, you've got to be a bit smarter around your recovery, getting your head around going to like sleep properly and waking up the next day and going again.
Filthy dirty.
Yeah, like not having the comforts, being controlled a bit more. Like you can't, on a single stage, you can control most things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot more variables that can come into play on a multi-stage. Like someone might take the spot you wanted to sleep in, or the tent might not be set up quite right.
Yeah.
It might be a bad night. There might be wind. You might feel like you want to carry on running, but the stage is finished. You can't.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to wait until the next day to go again.
And plus as well, mate, like you'll feel pretty good on the first or second day, but you've only done like 20-30% of the course, so you've got it. You actually, I mean, the strongest, and that's why I always planned it. The strongest day that we had was actually on the last day of MDS on multi-stage. Like you've got to be ready to. You got to run a whole marathon on the last day.
Yeah, and you almost get the finish line feeling like a lot of times, and it's almost misleading.
Yeah,
like the first 2 days. I mean, the most I've done is a 3-day one. Yeah, and you finish on the first two, and all you're thinking is, I've got to run again tomorrow. Yeah, and everyone around you's like, "Yeah, well done, you finished." And you're like, it's not. Yeah, it's not over yet. I think that's what makes multi-stage quite interesting for me. Actually, the first ultra I did was a single stage race, so I sort of entered it by mistake, and it was a 300k single stage race, which to be honest, big mistake to make, and I failed at 160. But the point there is that like, you kind of need to, if you're thinking, and that's what I want to aim this series a little bit at, if you're thinking about getting into it, you do need to be a little bit careful about how you go into ultra to have, like, for me, that failure spurred me on and made me want to experience things differently, and I'd already registered for MDS, so it was kind of like, I knew that going to MDS it'd be quite a lot easier than a 300k single stage. But that's what the beauty is at the moment, mate, is that there's so many of these races coming that people can enter. You know, they can enter here in Dubai, 22nd of March. You can do a 60k race through the mountains. So is that something that you think people... Is there, I mean, we speak about in triathlon, this rite of passage. You should do a sprint or a super sprint if you're really starting out until you get to an Ironman. What's your thoughts there? Yeah, I think you've got to be pretty naive to just go straight into I'd probably say over 100k for a single stage as a first time would be pretty amazing to be able to do. Yeah. But I don't think you should go in at the deep end with it. I think like the 60k stuff works really, because you're going to do it in training anyway. Yeah. If you've got a good coach. Yeah. So you may as well make them into events and learn from those events as you go. So kind of like the nature of training for it will make you sort of dip a toe in first, then go in a bit further up to your waist before you go into chest or neck height.
Go head deep, yeah.
Otherwise, how are you training for it?
Yeah, I think that's important, mate. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have a bad experience is because they're maybe not training properly for it. They maybe don't have that coach to help them, and therefore they don't do those distances.
Yeah.
So the first time, I remember speaking to some people, the first time in MDS that they went over 40k was in the middle of the Sahara.
That's mad.
It's absolute madness.
You have no idea how you're going to be at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Another race organisers that is worth, or there's two more that we want to flag up, that if you guys want to understand a little bit more about what Ultra is, there's one called Beyond the Ultimate. These guys organise, again, 3 or 4 races across 3 or 4 different continents, very different terrain as well. And then what we've been sort of promoting on the show recently, because the race is very close to us, is Ultra X. These guys are a new outfit. Their second race, first one of this year, is in Sri Lanka in April. I'm taking a few guys down there. Then they have races in Jordan and 2 or 3 other countries as well. So the point there, mate, is that we're seeing this thing called Ultra. We started out with these guys in the 70s and 80s. We've now got, we've just rattled off a really small portion, Marathon des Sables, Racing the Planet, Beyond the Ultimate, and Ultra X. There are literally hundreds of thousands of these races.
And you can almost, travel the world doing them all. They're in iconic locations.
Yep.
I know the one I would love to do is the Machu Picchu one.
Yeah, right.
Because I'd love to just go visit there and see it. And it's we may as well do a race.
May as well
while
make
you're
it
there.
a race. The final thing for this first episode, folks, is a little bit on the price of these races. As Tom said there earlier, Marathon des Sables it is probably one of the most expensive ones. It's about £4,500, which when you consider you're carrying all of your own stuff through the Sahara, you could probably offset that. The opportunity cost of that and a 5-star holiday in a resort somewhere is pretty straightforward to do. But what I really want to highlight, and it's not a shameless plug for these guys, I know they've been on the show and we've been pushing them a lot, but the Ultra X guys, I'll tell you more about their event when I come back from it, but they've come to the marketplace with a race for £1,000, which is very cheap, or £1,200, which is really super cheap. So there we go, folks. That is episode 1 of The Rise of Ultra. What is an Ultra? Hopefully we've given you a little bit of insight and a few of the companies to look up if you're thinking of getting involved. Make sure you tune in next week in podcast number 509, where we follow up this series with episode 2 under the title of Why is Ultra Rising?